Thank you very much for that introduction, Juan-Louis, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's listening, wherever you are in the world. I'm joining you from Adelaide, as Juan-Louis has indicated, and I apologise that I don't speak Spanish, and therefore this presentation will be in English, but the slides will be in Spanish, so that will hopefully be of help to people. If we could start the slideshow. Here we go. So the topic, reimagining internationalisation of the curriculum, begs two questions. Next slide. Why do we need to reimagine it, for a start? And how do we go about doing it? I'm going to talk about these questions and attempt to answer them, help you to answer them over the next 20 minutes, based on research that's been conducted over the last decade, some of which I've done myself, but also in collaboration with other people and drawing on literature from different parts of the world. Next slide, please. So why do we need to reimagine internationalisation of the curriculum? We all have plenty to do in our lives. We don't need to be doing things that are not necessary. So it's important to establish what are the primary reasons. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows a number of ways in which the world is changing. Higher education needs to change with it. And you can see many of the challenges that we do face are longer term challenges, things that have been plaguing the world for a while. And of course, we have our own pandemic to deal with in current times. So apart from rising nationalism, breaking up of old traditions through Brexit, for example, climate change, etc. We have a number of ways in which the world has changed, and higher education is part of the solution to that. Internationalisation of the curriculum is relevant to all of these issues in terms of what students need to know and how they might, as graduates, help to resolve some of these issues. Next slide. The other key part of the literature to consider is that the role of universities is evolving. Of course, universities have changed over the years, and the social impact of universities on a global scale is recognised as a key feature of the evolution of higher education. This means that universities are recognised now as not only having a responsibility to ensure national prosperity, but also a responsibility to contribute to the global common good through the creation of knowledge and its application to improve the lives of people all over the world. Furthermore, through this, to create dynamic and sustainable global communities, no less caring for human values than the pursuit of material wealth. This is a big job. Next slide. Now, alongside these changes in the world and changes in the role of higher education in the world, definitions of internationalisation of higher education have evolved over time. In fact, the internationalisation of higher education has been a phenomenon since the 1990s, and even though universities were involved internationally, that term internationalisation of higher education really was first used in the 1990s. And we see the first definition emerging in 1995, but you can see that it was updated 3 times. Similarly, internationalisation of the curriculum definitions have changed over time, and internationalisation at home, also comprehensive internationalisation. So it is a complex concept, and complex not only in the words, but also in the actions. So we're just going to explore some of these definitions a little more and what they mean today and what they might mean in the future. Next slide. So in 2015, the definition of the internationalisation of higher education was updated. The definition that was cited has been cited probably millions of times. Jane Knight's definition in 2004 was updated and revised as a result of research undertaken in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. And you can see on the slide the definition as it currently stands that was published by Hans de Wit and others in 2015. And the text in bold in that definition are the changes from the original 2004 definition. So you can see the word intentional has been added. The notion that we can't expect this to happen automatically. We have to plan for it and be quite purposeful in our approaches. A global dimension's been added to the international, intercultural dimension. And the notion of ensuring that internationalisation is focused on enhancing the quality of education and research, and not just for some students, but for all students and staff, and making a contribution and a meaningful contribution to society. So the definition has shifted and changed as is appropriate given shifts and changes in society and higher education. Next slide. If we now look at the notion of comprehensive, or the concept of comprehensive internationalisation that was published by John Hudzik in 2011 coming out of the US, we see this understood as and presented as not just a commitment, not just words on a page, but action. Not just something we talk about. Something that is all-encompassing and shapes institutional ethos and is values-based as well as expressed in actions. We see it explained as the infusion of international and comparative perspectives through teaching, research and service missions. So all missions of the institution. In other words, it's going to touch everyone in the institution and the entire institution. Therefore, you can't achieve comprehensive internationalisation without internationalising the curriculum. So in some ways, comprehensive internationalisation was a national US interpretation of the internationalisation of higher education, but they are completely harmonious. Now we move to the next slide, please. We move to internationalisation of the curriculum, and that also has been redefined in the last 5 years. This definition here that I published in 2015 was updated from a definition I published in 2009. The definition I published in 2009 was based on the literature and research that I had done for my doctorate, and that research was mainly based in one university in Australia and several universities in Hong Kong. But after that initial doctoral research, I gained a fellowship from the Australian government, and from 2010 to 2013, conducted research in Australia and internationally on how faculty, academic staff understood internationalisation of the curriculum. As a result of that, I modified the definition and I inserted the text that you see in bold. So I made it more specific about the need to consider learning outcomes and assessment tasks and teaching methods in the formal curriculum, but also the support services in the informal curriculum or the co-curriculum. And to do that across a program of study rather than intermittently, and to do it for all students rather than for an elite minority of students who can travel. In the discussion around the definition, it's clear from the literature and from the research I did that the expectation is that we will be dealing with what students know, so content, but also what they'll be able to do in professional practice and as citizens of the world, and who they will be, both as professionals and citizens. And this concept of internationalisation of the curriculum is essentially the same as the concept of internationalisation at home, except that it doesn't deny mobility. So internationalisation at home is only focused on those, the development of learning outcomes through the formal and informal curriculum. It is for all students, and it is only in domestic learning environments. But you see how there has been alignment between the development of these definitions and the development of higher education. Next slide. In summary, so why do we need to reimagine the curriculum? Well, the world has changed. It is changing. It will continue to. The roles of higher education institutions have evolved, and the purpose of the internationalisation of higher education has expanded and is increasingly focused on all students and recognising the need to develop their international and intercultural skills and knowledge through purposeful planning and action. This is a dramatic change from a focus on mobility programs for a small percentage of students, the recruitment of international students. It requires a reimagining of the curriculum and of internationalisation of the curriculum at home within the context of local programs. Okay, next slide, please. So how do we do it? This is a big job. How can we achieve this and keep alignment and, with the development of these concepts that we've just discussed? Next slide. So it's important to do this and to recognise these three elements of the curriculum when we do it. The formal curriculum, the content, teaching, methodology, learning and assessment activities that we see described in the syllabus, the extracurricular activities and experiences that we see, and also to think about some of those unintended hidden messages that we send all the time in the way that we organise the things that we do, whose knowledge counts in the curriculum, and the sort of services that are supplied to students in the informal curriculum. Next slide. So as part of my research, I developed an approach, a process approach, because we have to understand what we need to do as well in order to help students to develop the competencies that we want them to develop. And this diagram illustrates that process, and it is a fairly common representation of a review process where you review what's already being done, and then typically, though, you would jump to revising and planning. In this diagram, you have the focus on imagining and reimagining the way that you approach internationalisation. So looking at what you're already doing and thinking about how you might do that differently, but also what new things you might do, and importantly, how you can reach more, if not all of your students in the internationalisation of your classrooms, your campuses, and your engagements with communities. Next slide, please. This is a very complex diagram. There's a lot happening here. I just want to point out a couple of things, and there is a resource that explains this framework in much more detail, that has also been translated into Spanish that you can access later. It's also available on the website that's listed on the slide. The main thing to notice about this at this point is that when I worked with faculty and academic staff, for them, the starting point was knowledge in and across the disciplines. That was their starting point, but they were also influenced by those different layers of context represented in the bottom half of the diagram. And then it was important for them to focus on the curriculum design elements and aligning their teaching and learning approaches and their assessment of student learning with the requirements of professional practice and citizenship in an increasingly globalised world, but also in the local environment. So how those two things interacted being incredibly important for them to connect into the curriculum. Next slide, please. Now, the work that I did, I worked intensively with groups of staff for 6 to 8 to 12 months, depending on how long they wanted to work on that piece and the extent of the work they were doing. And as I was doing that, I worked also with senior leaders in institutions and then had a senior leadership role myself. So this has helped to identify 4 challenges I see in this task of integrating internationalisation of the curriculum into the strategy of the institution in a way that is practical and sees results. The first is moving beyond our own personal biases as educators, what something means. It's very hard to move away from a long-held assumption about what internationalisation of the curriculum means, for example. Secondly, to create the vision, to think about what the institutional focus for internationalisation of the curriculum will be. What will be the overall institutional strategy and how will it be expressed in a few words, perhaps in a phrase, that give people the opportunity to develop their understanding and to enact it in a way that is appropriate for their program. Then communicating that, of course, and distributing the leadership and responsibility by identifying new leaders as well as using existing leaders, because you're going to need more people to be involved if it's going to be distributed and integrated across the institution. And thinking about those 3 curricular dimensions, the formal, informal, and hidden curriculum, and how they might work together so that you can achieve more and go deeper into this endeavour. Next slide. Thank you. And now 4 challenges for program leaders. Again, critiquing their biases and assumptions about internationalisation of the curriculum and thinking outside the box, opening up all sorts of different opportunities. This was a space that people really did want to work in once they really got started on the process. For them, they have to also work out the purpose of internationalisation of the curriculum for their particular program and how that aligns with the institutional strategy and the professional requirements of their programs, for example. They have to design learning outcomes, content, pedagogy, work with teachers to make sure that those things happen in the classrooms. And they have to do that maybe thinking about new and existing resources, thinking about the opportunities of online learning that we've learnt a lot about in the pandemic. So this is a huge opportunity, I think, for people to grasp that opportunity and to think about how they could use virtual exchange or virtual mobility, partnerships with international partners to work together to internationalise the curriculum for students at home. Next slide, thank you. So in summary, to reimagine internationalisation of the curriculum, we really need to think differently about curriculum and internationalisation and understand the curriculum as being more than syllabus, much more than mobility. Think about how we can internationalise the curriculum for all students, preparing them to work as professionals and citizens locally, but in a globalised world, contributing to the global common good. See it as a complex process and understand it as that and take our time to work through that, distribute leadership around that, and look at those different components of the curriculum, as I mentioned earlier. Finally, to conclude, If we're going to put the notion of something like globally competent graduates at the centre of our institution, there are 10 elements that we need to really think about in integrating even that across the institution. Those 10 elements are described on the diagram here and discussed in more detail in Elspeth Jones' article, The Global Reach of Universities. But understanding then that internationalisation of the curriculum doesn't just stop with the program, that it will be integrated across the whole institution and can be an integral part of the development of the institution's international strategy. Next slide. Finally, context is critical. Rationale and purpose will vary in different countries, universities, and programs. Reimagination requires leadership, encouragement, development, change, support for change. There are no magic bullets here. There are no recipes, exact recipes. You have to find your own combination. Institutional strategy also must strike a really very good balance between setting direction but also allowing diverse disciplinary program interpretations, and leadership will need to be distributed across the institution. This can't be run only from the international office. Other people have to pick up the baton and run with it. And we need to put aside some of those existing assumptions that we have, and that's not going to be easy. We must recognise that's not going to be easy. But it will be worth it, and it is a worthy endeavour. So those are my closing remarks, and I'll hand back now to Jean-Louis. Thank you.